Hi, everyone. With reading The Story of the Brain in 10 and a Half Cells by Richard Wingate, one chapter that really intrigued me was chapter 4, which talked about sensory neurons. But specifically with sensory neuron, what piqued my interest was nociceptors. So let's dive into it. Quick overview. Sensory cells are specialized cells that are responsible for detecting and responding to specific stimuli from the environment. An interesting thing about sensory cells, though, is their structure. They have really long axons and a cell body, but they have no dendrites, so they cannot communicate with each other. They all kind of just line up and stem back to the spinal cord, back into the brain. Main function of sensory cells, as an overview, is to convert an external stimuli into electrical signals. They're found everywhere throughout the brain and body, specifically largely amount in the skin. And then there's many different types, but the one that I want to look at specifically is nociceptors for pain. So a nociceptor is a subtype of a sensory cell that is really in charge of detecting a harmful or damaging stimuli, such as heat, cold, pressure, chemical irritation, just to name a few. And what it does is it really converts a noxious stimuli into an electrical signal that can be transmitted to the brain for processing. Again, same as sensory cells, they're found throughout the entire body. And then one thing interesting about nociceptors is there's even more subtypes of them. So depending on what they're responding to, there's different types. So there's thermonociceptors, mechanical nociceptors, and then chemical nociceptors. And then diving into our next little area is going to be the pain and nociception. So what is pain? Pain has been defined as a complex constellation for sensory, emotional, cognitive experiences provoked by real or perceived tissue damage and manifest by certain autonomic, psychological, and behavioral reactions. And with that, nociception is the process itself of encoding that stimuli so that the response is pain. So with that, we have to obviously talk about the detection of those stimuli themselves. So nociceptor function are at the heart of it is ion channels and receptors, proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane that detect and respond to that stimuli. Two main ones that I'm going to mention are transient receptor potential channels, which are specifically for temperature, chemical changes, and capsaicin, which is that like really spicy compound we find in foods. And then a few other receptors are going to be piezo 1 and piezo 2, which are sensitive to mechanical stress, such as pressure or stretch to the skin. And then when they are activated, they allow ions to flow into the nociceptor, causing a depolarization to generate an electrical signaling that's transmitted to the spinal cord and then to the brain. And with that, pain signaling occurs. So when that nociceptor is activated, it sends signals via nerve fibers to the spinal cord and then travels to the brain, where pain is going to end up being perceived. And specifically with pain signaling, there are two types of nerve fibers that play key into that. A and C fibers. So A fibers are going to be the sharp and localized pain, and they are very quick at responding, whereas C fibers are slower and duller, more diffused pain signals throughout. Excuse me. And the fibers are very specific for ensuring the brain receives the necessary information to respond to the specific stimuli and trigger the reflexes. And then one thing that I thought was really fascinating about nociceptors specifically is their ability to change over time and respond to repeated or prolonged stimuli, which is known as nociceptor plasticity. It's actually an adaptation part of the body in a way of responding to injury. But another thing too is nociceptors can become hypersensitized or dysfunctional, leading to chronic pain, which we are still actively doing research throughout neuroscience to figure out what is causing that through the nociceptors. And then here are my references. My main reference I used was the Devlin and Papatouian paper on the nociceptors, the sensors of the pain pathway. It was a really interesting article that delved into everything I already talked about, as well as Richard Wingate and his lovely book, The Story of the Brain in 10 and a Half Cells. Thank you.